July the 7th, 1307, somewhere near Berg-on-Sands. July the 7th, 1307, somewhere near Berg-on-Sands. He is 68 years old. He has ruled England for 35 years. He is 68 years old. He has ruled England for 35 years. He has ordered executions, expelled an entire people from his kingdom, and dragged a nation's legal system into a new age through sheer force of will. His name is Edward, first of his name, King of England, and the world is about to become a very different place without him. Before we can understand the man, we need to understand the city. Before we can understand the man, we need to understand the city. A population of between 80,000 and 100,000 people crammed themselves into a space barely 2 miles wide, inside walls that the Romans had built over 1,000 years earlier. The streets were not paved. They were narrow, unpredictable, and filthy, a tangled mess of lanes, alleyways, and market rows with names like Cheapside, Cornhill, and the Shambles. Waste from animals and humans was simply thrown into the street or dumped into the River Thames. At the Palace of Westminster itself, the first sewer connection wasn't completed until 1307, the very year Edward died. And yet, London was also a place of extraordinary energy. The Thames was the city's lifeblood. Ships from France and the Baltic unloaded wool, wine, spices, and timber at the docks. The merchant guilds effectively ran the city, more powerful in many ways than the crown itself, when it came to day-to-day affairs. Here is something you need to understand about medieval London. It was dangerous. It was the beating heart of a kingdom that was about to be reshaped entirely. A study of the city's coroner records from the early 1300s revealed a city with between 13 and 22 recorded homicides every single year. The murder hotspots were Cheapside and Cornhill, the city's busiest commercial streets. People were killed over debts, over insults, over dice games gone wrong. One man was beaten to death for littering with eel skins. A student was shot with an arrow. Sundays, when men drank, were the most dangerous day of the week. The policing system was almost non-existent. Communities were expected to raise the hue and cry, shouting the alarm and chasing down offenders themselves. If you didn't join, you could be fined. Into this chaotic, violent city, Edward brought something new. Law. Hard, uncompromising, and systematically applied. Edward was born on the 17th of June, 1239, at the Palace of Westminster, the very seat of English royal power. His father was King Henry III, a man remembered as a patron of the arts rather than a warrior. His mother, Eleanor of Provence, encouraged Henry's lavish spending on culture. Edward was named unusually after the last great Anglo-Saxon king, Edward the Confessor, a saint his father revered above all others. It was an odd, backwards-looking choice. From his earliest years, Edward was educated rigorously: Latin, French, music, science. He was trained to rule, but training alone doesn't make a king. War does. At 15, he was married off to the 9-year-old Eleanor of Castile. She would later become one of the great queens of medieval England, traveling with her husband. When she died in 1290, Edward was so devastated that he erected a memorial cross at every location where her coffin rested on the journey to London for burial. 12 crosses. Before he ever sat on the throne, Edward had proven he was something different. In 1270, he took the cross, pledging himself to the Ninth Crusade. When the French king Louis IX died of plague and the other crusaders retreated, Edward arrived in Acre in May 1271 with just 1,000 knights. And he declared, "By the blood of God, though all my countrymen desert me, I will enter Acre and keep my word to the death." His crusade achieved little militarily. But in June 1272, an assassin crept into Edward's chamber and attacked him. With a poisoned blade, Edward survived, barely. The wound took months to heal. The story spread across Europe. By the time he set sail for home, he was already a legend. Then came the news. His father, Henry III, had died in November 1272. Edward was king. And remarkably, he didn't rush back. He toured European courts and met with the Pope. He arrived in England almost 2 years later. He was that confident no one would dare challenge him. He was right. He was crowned at Westminster Abbey on the 19th of August, 1274. He was 35 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and the most feared warrior in Christendom. Edward's first act as king was not war, it was accountability. In 1274, he launched an ambitious investigation into corruption, the 100 Rolls. In 1274, he launched an ambitious investigation into corruption, the 100 Rolls. Close-up of a royal seal being broken, justice and state control, somber scholarly tone. In 1275, the first Statute of Westminster codified hundreds of laws into a single framework. It addressed everything from elections to the rights of women to the conduct of markets. In 1285, the Statute of Winchester overhauled law enforcement. Town gates were shut from sunset to sunrise. Any stranger found inside after dark could be arrested. Any crime overnight was the town's failure. Historians gave Edward a nickname, the English Justinian. It's a comparison that would have pleased him. He was not simply conquering territories. He was building a state, law, hard and systematically applied. We cannot talk about Edward's reign without confronting one of its darkest chapters: the systematic persecution of England's Jewish community. This is a chapter treated with gravity. They had faced generations of persecution, forced to wear a yellow badge identifying them as Jews, barred from most professions and taxed at rates that would have bankrupted most communities. Money was their lifeblood. In 1275, his Statute of Jewry banned all lending at interest, the primary means of Jewish income. When many could not pay, they were arrested, and around 300 were executed for alleged coin clipping. In 1290, Edward issued the Edict of Expulsion. Every Jewish person in England was ordered to leave. Their property was seized. The debts owed to them were transferred to the crown. They would not return for 350 years. It was the first mass expulsion of Jews in European history, a systematic state policy of anti-Semitism. It stands in cold contrast to his reputation as a lawmaker and reformer, a dark and brutal legacy. Edward did not earn his fearsome reputation behind a desk. War was his true arena. The Welsh prince Llywelyn ap Gruffudd refused to recognize his authority. He defied summons after summons. He stopped paying agreed tribute. He refused to attend the coronation. Edward's patience lasted exactly 3 years. In 1277, he invaded Wales with a massive methodical force. Methodical and total destruction. Llywelyn was isolated, starved of support, and forced to submit. Edward was merciful, briefly. In 1282, the Welsh rose again. This time, Edward's response was total. He conquered Wales completely. Llywelyn was killed in battle. His brother David was captured and tried for treason, executed in a manner that shocked medieval observers, hanged, drawn, and quartered. One of the first such cases. Edward then did something no previous king had managed. He physically imposed rule through stone. He built a ring of castles, Caernarfon, Harlech, Beaumaris, that remain impressive to this day. Stone dominance. In 1301, he made his son the Prince of Wales, a title held by the heir to the throne to this day, a legacy carved in stone and tradition. But Scotland was a different matter entirely. War was coming. Scotland was different. When Alexander III died in 1286, Scotland had no clear monarch. Into this vacuum stepped Edward. He positioned himself as the arbiter of who would rule Scotland, a power move. In 1292, he chose John Balliol, the most legally credible claim, and treated Scotland as a vassal state. He summoned Scottish nobles to English courts and demanded troops for his French wars. He humiliated Balliol. Scotland broke. In 1295, a council made a treaty with France, the Auld Alliance. Edward invaded. He defeated Balliol and forced his abdication. He took the Stone of Destiny back to Westminster Abbey. He was the hammer. Scotland broke. In 1295, a council made a treaty with France, the Auld Alliance. Edward invaded. William Wallace rose in 1297, rallying resistance. His victory at Stirling Bridge stunned the kingdom, a martyr in the making. It sat in Westminster for the next 700 years. But the Scots did not submit. Resistance was rising. But Wallace himself escaped. He evaded capture for 7 years, a ghost in the Highlands, betrayed by his own, at every location where her coffin rested on the journey to London for burial. 12 crosses. William Wallace rose in 1297, rallying resistance. His victory at Stirling Bridge stunned the kingdom. A martyr in the making. Edward responded personally. At the Battle of Falkirk, his longbowmen shattered the Scottish schiltrons. Wallace's army was destroyed. But Wallace himself escaped. He evaded capture for 7 years, a ghost in the Highlands, betrayed by his own. By 1307, Edward was 67 years old and his body was failing. Dysentery was the real killer, brutal and slow. When he was finally taken in 1305, he was brought to London. Edward showed no mercy, a message of brutality. Wallace was executed with extreme brutality, his head placed on a spike on London Bridge. Instead of fear, he created a martyr. Crowd silhouettes looking up at London Bridge in the dawn light, a sense of martyrdom and silent defiance. By 1306, Robert the Bruce had taken the Scottish throne. The war was not over. It would never be over. Not in Edward's lifetime. The end was coming for the Hammer of the Scots, a dying king on a long road. So, what do we make of Edward III, the dominant force in British history of the 13th century? A man of state. The legal statutes he passed formed the skeleton of English common law for generations, the foundational steps of Parliament. By 1307, Edward was 67 years old and his body was failing. Dysentery was the real killer, brutal and slow. His castle building in Wales remains one of the most extraordinary feats of architecture. Caernarfon Castle still stands, breathtaking stone, and yet, he expelled an entire community based on their faith. He waged wars of conquest that cost thousands of lives. Brutal. He was the ideal medieval king, and exactly the ruler we should never romanticize. History isn't clean, it's complicated. On the 7th of July, 1307, Edward IV died at Burgh-on-Sands, within sight of Scotland but unable to cross into it. The end. The city on the Thames, the heartbeat of a kingdom. Thank you for watching this deep dive into medieval history. Final word. If you're interested in the brutality behind the textbook, make sure you subscribe. We cover the kings, the cities, and the battles. Subscribe now. Leave a comment telling me which historical figure you'd like to see cover next. History is worth understanding. See you in the next deep dive. Goodbye.